Now we're good. All right. Good morning, everybody. Good morning, everybody. We'd like to bring call this to order today. And the first thing that I would like to do is have approval of the agenda.
I'll make a motion to approve the agenda.
We have a motion.
Second.
And we have a second. Any discussion? Okay, the agenda is approved. Thank you. And let me get myself organized here. The second thing we have is public comments. Do we have anybody in the audience who would like to make a public comment? Seeing none, thank you. We'll move on then to approval of the minutes. I did catch one thing that was brought to my attention from Lily, and that is the date was February instead of March.
I do that kind of stuff all the time.
I
It's
didn't even
completely
notice.
understandable, but yes.
So we're good on that. So I do need a motion to approve the minutes.
I'd like to make a motion adding in the correct month.
Okay, we've made a few other corrections
Okay.
in the meantime. Thank you. We have a second?
Second.
We have a second. Thank you. Any discussion? Thank you. The minutes are approved. All right. Moving right along now to action items. The consideration of a text amendment by Jordan Harrell of Jernigan Oil Company to allow the use of LED digital displays for fueling stations. And we have Kelly to comment on that.
Yeah, so you probably remember we did discuss this initially at our last meeting. We had presented a draft text amendment for the planning board's review, and there was a recommendation for adoption of that amendment as it was presented, but as I've noted in your staff report, not very long after the planning board meeting, we heard from the town attorney. So I had sent the town attorney the version that you saw. Took him a while to look at it, but when he had the opportunity, he got back to me and he said that he was concerned about the way that amendment had been drafted, that it might run afoul of some legislation that had occurred with signage and requirements for content neutrality that came out of some legislation. I put it in your packet. It's the decision from Reed versus the town of Gilbert. This was in 2015, and it affected how governments can regulate signage, emphasizing the need for content-neutral sign codes that do not favor one type of speech over another. So the way we have been instructed to look at this is if you have to read it to determine if it's allowed, then it is not content neutral. If your determination of whether it can be permitted or not is based upon what it says, then that's potentially a problem based upon this ruling. So you can regulate its size, its height, its placement. You can regulate things of that nature, but you can't regulate its content. So what I had proposed to you, and actually I wanted to note that we actually went through a process of redoing our entire sign ordinance back in 2016 in light of this content neutrality language. So it has been on our radar, but when we were going through this request for fueling stations, the way it was drafted is how it made sense to be the most narrow and the most likely to not be taken advantage of. So, but in hindsight, we actually can't approach it calling out specifically fueling prices for gas stations. So we have to keep it not based upon the content of the sign, but rather the area, height, display, location of the sign. So what I have done is crafted a text amendment, which I think gets at this. I'm gonna pull it up on the screen. As you can see, it's amendments to section 7.20. This is the supplemental regulations that we have in place for fueling stations. So these are already in place. What is new is the red underlined language. So that's the piece that we propose to be added. Signage for fueling stations. Businesses engaged in the retail sale of gasoline may use manual changeable copy displays, which is what they have now, or digital electronic displays on their approved freestanding sign. If utilizing an electronic display, the following conditions shall apply. So, a maximum of 2 elements for the approved freestanding sign shall be digital display. And so, without context, it's hard to know what that means. But essentially, for them, it's going to mean that a gas station can have 2 blocks of digital display. One will be for regular gas, one will be for diesel. So those are the 2. No single digital display element may exceed 42 inches in length and 19 inches in height. The total digital display of all elements combined shall not exceed 11 square feet. So each individual element can be 42 by 19. You can have 2 of those. So in total, 11 square feet is going to be your max. We came up with the 42 and the 19 based upon what the applicant had provided last month in their packet. There was a rendering in there of the 16-inch letters and what that digital display would look like. I did reach out to the applicant all through this process as we were coming up with ideas to make sure that he was comfortable with it, and he was in agreement that what was being proposed was going to be adequate for what their request was. The next item there is within each digital display element, no more than 4 characters are permitted, and the characters shall not exceed a height of 16 inches. So in this one, previously we talked about the numbers being no greater than 16 inches in height, and the attorney said, well, you have to read it to figure out if it's a number. So it can't be a number. He recommended using the word character. No character can exceed 16 inches. And we landed on 4 because that's what you're going to need for a price. Your 3.25 and then your fraction for your 9/10 on the end. So 4 blocks. Again, I checked with Michael Harrell, and he was in agreement that would suffice for their need and be the minimum that they would want, or the maximum that they would want. The digital display shall be 2-color LED technology only. This hasn't changed. We were talking about using the red and the green to distinguish between regular and diesel fuel. The digital display shall have automatic dimming capabilities and shall automatically dim in response to ambient light. In no instance shall the digital display cause light trespass onto adjacent residential districts or uses. This is unchanged. At our last meeting, Michael Harrell spoke about how the brightness was determined by, there was a company standard, and the brightness was essentially a percentage, and it was dimming based upon nighttime, daytime, and other environmental factors based upon the recommendations from the manufacturer. He did note, and he has agreed, that throughout the process, if we see moments where we think it is too bright, we just need to contact him and he'll work with us to find that sweet spot for the percentage that we feel is comfortable. And then lastly, the digital display shall be fixed and shall not change or rotate more than twice in a 24-hour period. We landed on twice, thinking that hopefully prices aren't changing any more than that in a 24-hour period. Mr. Harrell agreed. He felt like this was adequate, but there could be some situations where price changes multiple times. So I don't know if the board wants to entertain a different number, or we can just understand that if in the instance that the price is changing and it's that fluctuating that quickly, that obviously if it changes 3 times, we're not going to cite them for violation. Up in your staff report, I did note, and I wanted to bring it to your attention, I think it's very unlikely, but essentially the way this is written, and because we can only look at it in terms of size, height, display location, and not the content, they are going to have 4 panels, 2 elements. So they could opt to not put 325 over 9/10, and they could write eggs, or they could write anything that's 4 letters. I don't think they're going to do it, but we can't put anything in here to prohibit that from happening, because then, again, we're relying on having to read it to determine whether we can allow it or not. So, that is what I have for you today. I did just tack on all the additional attachments that Mr. Harrell had provided last month. We also have an article in here from the School of Government that talks about Reed versus Town of Gilbert, and what it meant and what it does, and how we've all kind of had to adapt. An interesting thing, side note, but just to this regulation, so there's an allowance during the political season to allow those little political signs in the right-of-way. But it's why that during that time frame, if somebody puts that same sized sign in the right-of-way and it says pressure washing or painting, if we have to read it to see that it's not a political sign, it could potentially run afoul of this content neutral thing. So it's an interesting piece of legislation that we have to kind of navigate.
But you have to read the political sign. I don't understand that.
True.
Yeah.
So essentially, any sign during the political time frame that meets that
And that,
Okay.
area,
I do believe
we
that,
can.
Okay.
I do believe that's happened. There was there's a concordance in what I remember around the time of the last election. There were a bunch of errant signs, at least 2 different errant signs that showed up in the area of all the other signs. And some of them are still flying, shall we say.
We try to snag them. I think Ed picked up like 30
Yeah.
yesterday that had nothing to do, obviously,
Right.
and we're outside of the political season, but anyway, I just thought that was interesting as to how this legislation affects everything.
Yeah.
But I have on the screen what Mr. Harrell provided previously, which is what we used to come up with our numbers. It's hard to see, but this is how we came to the width and the height of the numbers based upon what was desired. And again, this is what their sign looks like today with this manual changeable copy. And this is what they would ideally like to have should the amendment be. It's hard to see, but when you get up close, this is 4 panels. You can see the actual backdrop in there. So I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. Michael Harrell was unavailable to be here today, but he did send a representative from Jernigan Oil who's here. Should you have any questions based upon the request for the signage. And I'll try to address any questions that you have as well.
Thank you, Kelly. Does anybody?
Kelly, I have one question, and that is content neutral. That kind of surprises me in a bit. I mean, I'm concerned about if you don't have to read it. I mean, I'm like, what about off-site advertising and stuff like that? Where does that put us as a town? I mean, does that mean that you can advertise in a commercial zoning district pretty much anything you want?
It does. We try to not advertise it any more so than we have to. But yes, if it were to pop up and we try to cite it as a notice, as a violation, they could challenge it based upon the new legislation.
Has that occurred? I mean, have we had any issues with people wishing to put up signs that weren't, germane to the location. I mean,
I'll be honest with
off-site
you,
advertising.
it has, and we've just discussed it with the property owner or the person who had erected it, and they took care of it. But that's not to say that they couldn't have pursued it.
Thank you, Kelly. Does anybody else have any questions for Kelly?
Well, I don't know if it's a question, but it's a thought. With the lighting, like it says, we could just ask Mr. Jernigan to bring the notch down if it's too bright, but this wouldn't be the only gas station involved. Like, what if the other players aren't so cooperative and don't want to bring their levels down? Can we somehow say, like, in the ordinance that the town needs to be able to request a lower brightness if we don't want that?
Yeah, we can work something in there for that. The only thing is, and I think Mr. Harrell spoke to
Oh,
it.
Mr. Harrell, right, sorry.
So they operate on a percentage of light display. So
Mhm.
for us, we can go out there and we can put our light meter down and we can read that this is 1.2 foot candles, X amount of feet away. Or we have the ability to gauge like the lights that you see in parking lots and things like that.
Mhm.
To be able to get a readout of some type of lumen, foot candle, Kelvin, I think I read that nit was a word that they use in the industry as well, for an LED light. We don't have that piece of equipment to do that. It's my understanding that it's based upon predominantly an overall percentage, and maybe you can help me out here, but I think Mr. Harrell said that like daytime it operates on like a 60%, at nighttime it operates on 40% or something of that nature. So we can try to put in percentages just based upon the manufacturer's specifications. And I think I'm concerned with how we create a set standard that accommodates every variation of the day and every weather element
Mhm.
for proper visibility. But I can try to come back with that.
I just
But
think about like the 7-Eleven is in a neighborhood, like there's houses right beside it. What if that light was too bright or? the
So we
one-
have in here that it can't trespass.
Right,
It shouldn't be, the light should not trespass from the property onto any other adjoining property, which obviously we can regulate that. But, I think at our last meeting, I felt like there was a comfort level with what Mr. Harrell had indicated about just in, like, using the percentage, but, I'm happy to take it back and try to figure out what type of light measurement unit we use for LED signage, and how to correlate that to a percentage.
If I remember correctly from the last meeting, Mr. Harrell said that the manufacturer's standard reduction in the evening was 22% reduction in the brightness of the light. But if we did not find that to be sufficient, that they can do it manually also. From remotely, they can do it manually. So,
Right, and I think if anything, there may just be an acknowledgement that once this occurs within the town, we can always come back and set the minimum and the maximum, once we see what that looks like.
Does the other, generally speaking, the light standards, lumens, et cetera, is that situation is evolving as well? Is that what I'm kind of understand is, as far as measurement units, types of light, et cetera, that's evolving? Could we fashion into this so that would be agreeable with those standards as they develop, because it's a fairly,
Yeah, so
there's a lot of flux in it?
there is, I mean, we're having to convert and figure out how we apply what used to be foot candles now to
Mhm.
LEDs, because clearly, you know, that's functioning off of kelvins and a color temperature, not necessarily foot candles. So, it's evolving. This would be another kind of avenue that we would have to explore.
Well, but I guess if there was something in there, you know, at that last bit on neighboring property. And the analogy that I use in my head to kind of understand this is you're driving down the road at night, especially on a highway where there are a lot of vehicles. The different vehicles that approach you may be more aggravating than others. There is brightness, but there's also some lights are a little bit more
Yeah.
a little bit more distracting, I'm going to say, and that fits into this niche of this evolving reaction to temperatures of light, the heat in it, and also lumens in reaction to that. So that's something that I'm quite interested in generally, the town developing more standards on that. But it seems that because it is not just a lumen measurement, that has to kind of evolve as well. So once that, is it possible to fashion this ordinance or to put something in this ordinance to build that in, realizing that everything is going to change as more tech changes?
Yeah, absolutely. We can do that. And if there is no conversion to our standards now, then, you know, we'll take the next step with that, because as you said, if it's not just Mr. Harrell that's going to be doing it, you know, any gas station within the town could do it, so.
Well, but as well, if you have a spotlight on the side of your building and it fits into this category where they have a nagging light, it could fall out of order with that new standard that has not been arrived at yet
So I feel like,
on an adjacent property.
right, we understand, so lighting, residential lighting came up in the community survey as a problem. So we've acknowledged that we do need to address more residential lighting. We've acknowledged that our lighting codes in general need some revision. So we will address all of those things, but I think in terms of this application, I would be more interested in trying to figure out the way that we measure their LED light and maybe focus on the light trespass and the residential lighting concerns and things of that in a more holistic manner with updating your lighting ordinances generally. But for this, trying to think about how to move it forward. Obviously, you can make a recommendation today. It goes to consent agenda in May, public hearing in June. We can move forward knowing that we'll do our very best to get a cap on the maximum prior to the public hearing. But I think that's going to be working with Mr. Harrell as well as some lighting professional and making sure that we even have the equipment available.
Or if not specific numbers, because like you said, the technology is constantly changing, so maybe it doesn't make sense to put specific like lumens or kelvins in there, but maybe like some little provision that the town can somehow regulate each specific lighting situation.
Right. So in here now, we have in no instance shall the digital display cause light trespass onto adjacent residential districts or uses. We could maybe tighten that down to just not leaving the boundary of the site. I think along 158, that's going to be difficult.
Right.
We can try to
I don't
craft
know.
some
What do
language
y'all
that
think?
narrows it down.
I mean, that is narrow, I guess. What do y'all think? Is that
Well,
narrow enough?
In the case of Jernigan Oil's 2 locations in the town, one of them does not border on either side a residential property. And then one of them does on one side across a street. So in their case, it may not be a big deal at all. But if someone in future wants to put up a digital sign, who is abutted on each side with residential property, it might be a bigger deal.
Well, that's where the future technology would come into play, where the town would be able to measure that brightness and
Yes.
see.
I think we're getting to a place where obviously we're gonna need to purchase whatever equipment it is and educate ourselves on how we're measuring LED light output from a digital sign for a fueling station at 15 feet in height.
I think the Shell sign puts off more light than the numbers.
I think it
That's
probably
Right,
does.
yeah, I don't think the numbers are gonna be what's.
Okay, thank you, Kelly.
Sure, thank you.
Anybody have any other questions or comments? You need a motion.
I do. If you're comfortable doing so, knowing that we'll bring back additional lighting information at your May meeting.
Okay. Do I have a motion?
So moved.
We have a motion.
Well, the motion is to
Second?
approve it as
Second.
is.
We have a second, thank you.
I'm sorry, there was discussion?
The motion is to approve it as presented. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Yes, okay.
All right, any further discussion? All in favor? Aye.
Aye.
Any negative?
Aye.
We have one negative. Okay, thank you. All right. So we shall move forward then to consideration of a text amendment to prohibit driving or parking on residential septic systems. Kelly, you're still up.
Still up, and this is yet another one that you've heard previously, that we're bringing back. So you may recall, a couple of months ago, we brought before you a text amendment that had originated out of the Septic Health Advisory Committee conversation, where we were hoping to create an ordinance that would prohibit people from driving over or parking on their septic systems when they were adjacent to their driveway, parking areas, turnaround, things of that nature. Like, you've seen it more often than not on the beach road, oceanfront, where your driveway is adjacent to the septic system, and when they need overflow parking, they just veer off and park on the septic. So we were trying to create an ordinance that would prohibit that by requiring that a physical barrier be put in between the parking area and the septic area so that they couldn't maneuver their vehicle over there. Even at the time that we presented it, we acknowledged that it could potentially unnecessarily impact others, requiring them to install a physical barrier when perhaps they had no intention of parking on their septic system. But it was going to be a general requirement applied town-wide. So after thinking through it, what we've brought back to you today is an ordinance that is maybe not as proactive as the previous ordinance, but one that wouldn't unnecessarily affect as many property owners. This one basically states that, well, the ordinance would be revised to expressly prohibit parking and driving on your septic area. So instead of trying to catch it before it happens, we're now saying if you do it, it's a violation of the town code. And when we see that it's being done, you're going to get a notice of violation. The property owner will get the notice of violation because we'll have a specific code section that we can cite that you're in violation of. And then from that point forward, as it continues to happen, they'll continue to get daily citations for the infraction. For compliance, we would actually put in there that the installation of the barrier is a requirement to gain compliance. So this way, we're essentially only affecting the properties that have shown that they do have a problem with it, as opposed to perhaps affecting properties who would not have a problem with it. So, the amendment itself would be to section 10.12.9, creating new language that states parking on septic areas prohibited. Driving or parking on designated septic system areas is expressly prohibited. To resolve violations of this ordinance, the property owner may be required to install a physical barrier separating vehicular areas from septic system areas in order to limit damage to the system. Acceptable physical barriers may include fencing, post and rope, raised landscape bed, landscape timbers, or other landscaping treatments as approved by the UDO administrator. Physical barriers must be installed with adequate setback to prevent damage to the septic system as determined by the UDO administrator. And so what that's going to get to is if you're doing post and rope, if you're embedding something into the ground, you're going to need to be a couple of feet off your drain line. You don't want to sink anything that close to your drain line. But if you're just going to do some railroad ties or some planters, there's really not going to be a setback associated with that. So we'll determine that on the site plan review. The definitions that we had proposed previously for septic system, septic tank, disposal field, septic system area, those are all unchanged. So essentially what this is doing, as I said, is taking that more town-wide proactive approach and kind of reeling it back and only enforcing this upon those who have shown that they're having trouble not parking on their septic areas. Happy to answer any questions.
I was thinking a little bit about this after our last meeting, and the way this came together, it might, in a situation where there is development of a property where runoff is contained in a dry well, or there is a French drain or something like that that is constructed as part of management of shed water coming off the roof or shelter area. In a situation where that are there situations where that is contingent, the CO is contingent upon that being completed? And if so, maybe punch into that. So this is the case. You've got an area that's wet. You've got a big property where there's a lot of rainwater coming off. The applicant, in the process of developing plans for the property, needs to develop, because water cannot trespass, that's not supposed to be an okay thing off of your lot. It's supposed to be maintained on your lot and dealt with whenever possible. There may be gutters put in, drip lines put in, French drains put in, maybe even a dry well put in. Should that be included in this so that you don't park on it as well?
On the gutter?
What?
On the gutter?
On the gutter, dry well, because that would negatively affect its ability to do what it was engineered in there. And I believe that there are situations where that kind of water management on site, with an understanding that it should not trespass, should be managed on site. So if it is a contingent of the CO, it's not a huge ask for that to be in a similar shelter of this kind of a setup. And it overall maintains the properness of the CO to maintain it should not trespass off of property whenever possible.
Yes, so, yes, any new development, any residential development, you have to have a residential stormwater management plan associated with it. Those measures that are proposed, approved, and constructed they do have to be in place prior to receiving your CO. They are documented on your as-built survey. So obviously, in hindsight, if somebody were to violate this section of the code, we're requiring them to install a barrier. It's an update to their site plan. So yeah, we would be pulling that site plan. We would see these were the approved stormwater management measures that you were required to install. And take that into account and what type of measure, what type of barrier they're gonna provide.
Because the septic is very, very much forward in the documentation that I've seen so far. But many of those additions will be very hardy and might not be damaged by this, but there's some that might.
No, it will absolutely be taken into
Okay.
consideration
Okay.
as part of the
Cool.
site plan.
I'm wondering if there's like an education component, like would you alert property owners that it's now legal to park on your septic area? Because I think there are a lot of
Oh,
people
absolutely.
who don't even know.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, no, everything, from the staff report, everything that we included previously, this was noted in the community survey, it's part of the strategic plan, obviously having an outreach campaign, with our septic health initiative,
Mhm.
it's priority, so all of this, there would be an education
Yeah.
push prior.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's good,
Without a
yeah.
doubt.
Good question. Any other comments? So we need a motion here to approve this?
I'll make a motion to approve it.
Super. Do we have a second?
A second.
We have a second? Thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Anybody opposed? Okay, thank you. Motion carries. Okay, and we have we had something else here.
I think the next
That's a
up,
discussion item, okay. All right, so.
Board of Commissioner actions.
Yep. I was thinking the other came first, but that's all right.
It's weird how the
Yeah.
agenda kind of goes back and forth.
All right, so, Kelly?
All right, so in terms of Board of Commissioner actions at their April 3rd meeting, I included this in your packet. We can go through it quickly, there's not a whole lot on here. We had maxed out our $320,000 that was originally allocated to the dune management cost share program. We were still having people apply for that, and so the board wanted to put a little more money in there to allow them to continue to receive that grant funding for stabilization of dune grasses and sand fences. So that was heard and approved at their April meeting. We did note, the mayor did note that we would be coming back to the planning board with these septic changes that we just heard. The board did vote to adopt the text amendment from Albemarle and Associates on behalf of Galassa Holdings to allow the long-term rental of units within existing hotels and motels. We spent a lot of time on that, so as you know, that applies to about 5 hotels and motels within the town. When I gave the director's report, Commissioner Brinkley did want to confirm that while we realize there's an issue with the placement of the EV and the geothermal system, that we were going to be relocating those spaces and there shouldn't be any additional cost, and there should not be. Everything we've encumbered should be adequate to facilitate the new location when that's determined.
We don't know where it's gonna be yet.
We don't yet. I'm hoping that by, hopefully before the Board of Commissioners May meeting, we can give them an idea of where, and then obviously let the planning board know as well.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We gave a presentation to the Board of Commissioners about accessory dwelling units. So at their fall retreat, and then as part of a strategic plan, they had asked that the planning department draft a accessory dwelling unit ordinance, but that it had a menu of options for some of the regulatory standards, like, you know, where would we consider allowing them? What would the area be? What would the height be? Lot coverage, setbacks, architectural design, just a host of options so that they could review that and decide if there was an appropriate location for ADUs within the town. So they were in agreement that they did want us to move forward with exploring it, but they asked us to bring back some additional information about existing non-conforming ADUs, issues that they've had with existing ADUs that are out there now, an idea of the available lots in terms of where they're at, what are the lot sizes, how many are there, review of how to incentivize property owners to go from short-term to long-term. So that's an issue that we've already kind of talked about here a couple times. And then to find out how other localities that are allowing ADUs, how it's going there, and if they're applying any type of deed restrictions, if they're having any issues or coming into any problems with that. So that's a big part of our plate going into the May Board of Commissioners meeting, is trying to pull this information for them, but of course keep the planning board updated throughout the process. And then gave an update on the hazard mitigation plan. As I'd reported out previously, the county, Dare and Currituck County, is looking to do an update of their Outer Banks Regional Hazard Mitigation Plan. And we had to have some citizens appointed. And so at their last meeting, the Board of Commissioners did appoint Commissioner Megan Lambert and Planning Board member David Thompson to the Regional Hazard Mitigation Planning Committee. So I provided an email to both Megan and David yesterday, but I wanted to make sure everyone here knew the first Planning Committee meeting is going to be on April 22nd at 2 p.m. at the Emergency Operations Center in Manio. So that meeting is going to be for the Planning Committee, which is going to be the citizen representatives and representatives from each town and county. Following that, there's going to be a public meeting, a kickoff meeting, also April 22nd. It's going to be at 5 p.m., also at the EOC. So this is a public meeting where they're going to kick off the process, discuss the process with citizens, obviously accept any questions, and just have open communication about it at that time. That's the one in Dare. They're going to have the same thing in Currituck County on the 23rd. So if you can't make the public meeting in Dare, you can obviously go to the one in Currituck County. That's going to be April 23rd at 5:30 at their Public Safety Center in Barco. So if anyone is interested, please can reach out to me. I can give you more details, but of course you're welcome to attend. So, and I highlighted in here, there was consensus that the mayor send a letter to NC Rules Commission on behalf of the board regarding the Jockeys Ridge AEC rules concerning the area of environmental concern. Mayor Cahoon encouraged comments from the public to be forwarded to the commission prior to their meeting on Monday, April 8th. The next CRC meeting is in Dare County, April 24th through the 25th, for anyone interested in attending. It's my understanding, and Joe actually spoke with some CAMA representatives about this, that those emergency rules were not upheld. They're going to be in place for about, we were told 2 weeks last week. It does seem like this is becoming a bit of a problem that we need to be cognizant of and stay apprised of as it moves forward. So that's about all the information I have on it, but I'm sure Roberta Thuman will be putting out more information on our town's website about next steps and how we move forward.
Is everybody as confused as I am about what's happening?
Yes.
Yes.
Like, I
I sent a
cannot get my
letter,
head
and I feel
around
like
it.
that's nothing. Like, I feel like sending a letter does nothing.
Well,
And I did it,
Like
but I
the
mean, I
whole-
feel like that does
Well,
absolutely nothing.
Strange.
it was mentioned in, the amount of it was recognized by the group that there was a lot of citizen contact, like that one, an email. But it's really, I just find it incredibly interesting that in every attempt to make this very non-opaque situation more opaque, perhaps one might even say transparent, the attempt to understand why still exceeds us. We cannot understand the why in this. And it is the simple, in a representative democracy, which we apparently live in, we all come up in boards like this, quasi-judicial, we take oaths. That exceeds the ability of that board to reach out and tell people that are directly affected by this edict why. What effectual overreach the existent situation had on the change of anything, and how they plan to make this brave new world better for us all. And I, for one, find that highly circumspect.
So do we all.
Agree,
Yeah.
agree with you.
Well, but
I apologize, I don't have much more to add.
No, I mean, that was me, I was on a mini dais there, I'm sorry I got off on my own track. But I feel like the resonance in the room represents there's at least a degree of concordance with the rest of the people in this group. Now, I'm not sure, and the biggest problem is that silence serves not the public, but the people, but whatever intent is behind this change.
Do you think there will be public comment at this April 24th meeting? Or do you think they're just gonna go over what?
I honestly don't know. I know that at the commissioners' meeting, the mayor encouraged people to attend it, but whether or not they will be accepting comments, I don't know.
So it's 2 days?
Yes.
24th, 25th,
But-
yeah.
and do you know where that is?
I don't, but I can find that out shortly after this meeting. I can send.
I feel like we need to do more than just send an email. I don't feel like that's gonna do anything. You know what I mean? Like, I feel like we're kind of all like, well, what do we do? You know, like.
Yeah, it's in an effort to try to get on the front foot, I'm on my heels with this. And there's the lack of information flowing from the group means that everything we do is reactive to things that have already taken place. And the fact that crickets are moving the clock forward past that 2-week
Well,
margin.
it's not just gonna affect Jockey's Ridge. If they change this, it's gonna affect everyone that we have, like Nags Head Woods and
Well, it will,
like all the different,
but
it's
as
not
well,
just one.
but as well, there is the possibility that this could also affect every other CRC, CAMA, any other thing like that. And if this is the much-used nose in the tent, maybe we should really paint that camo a bright color.
That meeting is open to the public.
The
Yeah, but are
question
they
is-
gonna have us just sit there and listen to what they're saying? That's where I'm at. We need to do something. We
I
don't
do
need to
see that
just-
it is going to be held at the Dare County Governmental Center over in Manio.
Because I have been to meetings where they just,
Where they don't allow
Dude.
public comment?
I mean, they just kind of tell you what they're gonna do and then that's it. I mean, there's got to be more we can do to,
I guess use of a sign ordinance might be a thing.
So maybe Renee,
Yeah, certainly,
she's on that committee,
yeah,
so.
that's true.
Anyhow, thank you. Before we move forward, on item 11, Commissioner Brinkley touched briefly upon the task force on the multifamily housing. Would you like to just let us know let everybody here who's not on that task force kind of know where we are?
Sure. So this item up here was about, in reference to the Dare County Housing Task Force, not the internal one that we are working on.
Right.
So the Dare County Housing Task Force, I forget what day it was, but I'm sure people have heard that the Dare County Board of Commissioners did host a special public meeting. They received a lot of comments. I think it was upward of 2 or 3 hours of comments. And at the end of that meeting, their determination was to essentially no longer pursue affordable housing projects as a board and to return the monies that they had received for affordable housing. So that, I think, was a bit of a shock. But that was the motion that was made. I believe Commissioner Woodard did state that they would keep the housing task force together and doing their monthly meetings, and should something come out of that, separate of obviously what the board was doing, that they would, that they would welcome it. And so actually that meeting is today, it's this morning, and Town Manager Andy Garman and Mayor Pro Tem Mike Sears are actually there this morning. So we'll have more information, I guess, on how they pivoted based upon what happened at their last
So
meeting.
that motion was made, did it carry, or was it?
It did.
Okay. Or was it? Oh, it wasn't.
Yes, so, and then I'll go ahead, if it's an appropriate time, and just quickly say, separate from this, obviously the town has their multifamily dwelling working group that has been put together. Molly and Mead are serving on that. We had our second meeting yesterday. Both meetings have been good conversation. They've been productive, but we're not at a point yet of being able to put together any type of draft ordinance. Staff will be working on that in the next coming weeks, but it seems to be some of the points that keep coming up. The planning board's recommended ordinance had minimum unit area of 800 square feet. Part of the conversation is, would we consider something less than that? Would we consider lowering that minimum unit area to 500, to 600? What's going to be that minimum? Also, do we need a minimum? So that's a conversation. Obviously, density has been a conversation. One thing that came out of yesterday's meeting was maybe looking at some alternatives to the language that we came up with of, how we did 3 units for your first 26,000 square feet, and then you can have an additional unit per 4,500 square feet after that. Is maybe looking at, are there other ways to address that? So an example would be, what if you based your density off of bedrooms and not area? So for instance, if you had 1 acre in the R2 district, you could have 2 large single-family dwellings. So for our large single-family dwellings, we can't regulate bedrooms, but we can tell you the maximum septic capacity, which equates to 9 bedrooms. So if you had 2 of those, you would have 18 bedrooms on 1 acre, essentially. So what if we approach the large multifamily dwelling development not from a unit per area, but more perhaps bedroom per area? That way a developer has an option for 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms. We're not making that decision for them.
Did a thought about, sewage versus septic enter into that at all. If septic is, if there is sewage capacity in an area, then that would not be a limitation. Did that enter into this fray?
So I don't think we're entertaining anything other than on-site septic for these
So
conversations.
you would mandate that there would be nothing but on-site septic?
Well, right now,
Do we
we
have a
only
choice?
have one central sewer, which
I
is
was
the
gonna say.
village, and no one can connect to that. Otherwise, there's no opportunity for any other type of central sewer.
Okay, I'm just kind of looking north. If there was capacity could a vendor using the utility right-of-way get conveyance for sewage to move through the town? Could they get a permit for that now?
I believe I don't have an elaborate answer for
Okay.
you, but that's come up multiple times, and it has never actually come to fruition. Multiple people have wanted to tie on to Kill Double Hills due to their proximity there in that C3 district, the institutional district. And I'm sorry, I can't point to what code prohibited that, but to this point, that's not been something that people were capable of doing. Even to the extent of wanting to tie on to the village, that's precluded as well.
Right, okay.
So,
And just for the board, I'm not sure if, as it exists now at the monument, just south of the monument, there's a facility back off the west side of the road. The pipe from that facility carries the whole way down to just north of 8th Street and carries the whole way north to past Avalon Pier. And so there is, within the utility right-of-way, both ways, a pipe moving with various stations to move that material, convey it back to the complex behind Kill Double Hills Public Works. So, and that extension, this is the only winter that there hasn't been an extension onto that. The last one took place to include one of the houses where there was a fire on the south end of Kill Double Hills. So, you know, that's not my, that's my, just casting it into, yeah. That's a long way, but.
no, it's a consideration.
Mhm.
I think right now the conversation's only been
Okay.
on site, but that, you know, that's part of the discussion as well.
Mhm.
Density area, I will say that, as part of the group, it's been discussed, the portion about deed restrictions. We also spoke with a local realtor about his thoughts on whether or not the deed restrictions would be problematic. He did not think so. Really, nobody in the room has expressed that they feel like deed restrictions are problematic. So I don't see any interest in changing that. So that was interesting. So those seem to be the major topics. Andy and I have a lot to do in the next coming weeks. So.
Well, one thing that came up was the realtor said that the C2 properties are very, very expensive on the bypass. And so it led the group yesterday to want to look at other areas in town, not just C2 on the bypass.
Mm.
So,
So all areas of C2.
right.
So if you were to grade the work that we did on an A through F scale, you know, how is our homework doing to the group?
I mean, I still like what we did.
Well, no, but how does it, is it holding up yet?
I think it is.
I think so. I mean, several people have said they like most of it.
Yes.
There's just, they are looking at tweaks so that it's doable.
Okay. It's interesting because.
Would you agree? Do you agree with that?
I do.
Yeah.
I think they generally, everyone in there respects the ordinance and thinks that it was, you know, very well thought out. And, you know, I think they appreciate the work that we've done.
I think so, and there's a lot of questions coming up, like, what if we looked at it this way, or what if we considered
Mhm.
alternatives, and from size to whatever. And the thing I came away with was the fact that there's a lot more options. And so we're kind of examining other things, but the framework that we're working off of is all the work that we did.
Mhm.
So, I mean, that set the parameters and everything, and then you can react to that. So it's like a draft that we're working from. And that, it's good. So I'll give you an A. Thanks, Kelly.
Yeah, the curve is
All right.
appreciated on that
So-
grade, yes.
Kelly, any more questions for Kelly? All right, thank you, Kelly. Okay, on to discussion items. Related to the installation of netting as a barrier to prevent golf balls from leaving the boundaries of the golf course, and that would be the Nags Head Links Golf Course. And the ball leaving the golf course going out of bounds, causing damage to adjacent private property. I'll leave it to you, Kelly.
This is, I think this is gonna be very brief and, can obviously answer any questions that you have, but after our meeting, there was some discussion about netting at this height and what negative impacts could it have, on birds, waterfowl, things of that nature. So, I started out trying to contact the, North Carolina Wildlife Commission. They reached back out to me pretty quickly and sent me over to U.S. Fish and Wildlife. I was able to connect with a local conservation biologist who was really interesting. They have a program called IPAC. I forget the acronym, but essentially they've documented every critter you could imagine and its location. So when you enter in an area of impact or proposed activity, they can tell you the birds, animals, everything that could potentially be impacted based upon the area that you've selected. So they did run that program through this, and they identified, I think there's 2 types of bat species that would be impacted. One endangered, one threatened, several that don't have a classification in terms of birds. I can pull it up, but there was one endangered, one threatened, and like 36 that have no designation but are predominant in that area. But their word back to me was that if the netting were of a certain thickness, that they don't feel like it would be problematic for the bird flight patterns and the bat flight patterns. So, spoke with Mead about this yesterday, and this is a scenario that's come up from one property owner. I understand the concern, but at this point in discussing it, I also reached out to the Nature Conservancy, Aaron McCall, Laura Eddy. They all provided good feedback as well. There's a general concern, but there's nothing prohibiting it. So my thought is, as opposed to taking this through a text amendment process, probably better to just try to work one-on-one with Mr. Mueller about some different options that he may want to look into. One thought that we had was, if you are moving forward with the netting, that it has to be perhaps, well, obviously within the setback for your principal dwelling, but closer to your home, not out on the property line. So if you pull that back closer to the home, to the pool, et cetera, hopefully you already have birds that are taking into account the house, and they're going around it anyway, so they're not gonna hit the net. From a permitting standpoint, if something like this were to be out on the property line, it would be a barrier or a fence. If it's within your building line, it's part of your home, and your home can be 35 feet in height. So I think working with him individually at this point on his options versus trying to craft a text amendment is going to be the best bet in this scenario. So that's where we are with that. Happy to answer questions, and I will of course keep you updated at each meeting with what he decides to do. But my gut is that this would be better suited for a one-on-one resolution as opposed to amending your code.
Thank you, Kelly.
Good.
Any comments?
No, I'm very happy with that, actually.
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
I think that's a good way to go. All right. Well, thank you. Planning and Development Director's report.
I think we've hit everything, to be honest with you. We talked about the new septic ordinance. We have a recommendation to move forward with that. We're continuing to search out, apply for, and try to seek funding to initiate some of our projects on the Estuarine Shoreline Management Plan. We talked about the geothermal for EV, the additional funding for sand relocation. Joe has put together a pre-application for coastal waterfront access grant for the Dune Street beach access, so should be hearing back from that hopefully pretty soon. It was due on the 15th, so we got that in well within time. Permit turnaround, holding strong, and just an update on Dowdy Park Farmers Market events. So we had our last winter market this Saturday, very well attended, and Paige is now focused on summer events.
Thank you, Kelly.
Can I ask a question about the beach access stuff?
Yeah.
ADA is, and this very likely is for you. ADA is, it's the platinum level of accessibility that every project seeks. Is there any type of grant that could be applied for, received for, when speaking to people who are in need of access to the beach, and when talking to people who are using various conveyances, for whether they have wheels or walkers, whatever they are, there is a spectrum of what they're looking for, but what they need, what they're trying to have is access. And the question is ADA it? Or is there some other level where if you make it, as I understand it, if you are building up a beach access or a public facility, you need to make it accessible to all. Now, what I kind of dove into here was the National Park Service deals with more accessibility issues than any other authority that I know of, specifically. And to try to make a location like the Grand Canyon handicapped accessible is very difficult because you can't knock the Grand Canyon down because of obvious reasons, hopefully. But they do a really good job at viewing that continuum, that spectrum. And so if the town were to look at some of the beach accesses that would be improved or are being redeveloped, maybe developing a general series of guidelines, so instead of building up automatically, maybe just laying it over top of existing and then looking at maintenance as a lot easier, because if it is, shall we say, ramps, you can use mechanized equipment, you can roll soft tracks, perhaps even tires, over that. As compared to stairs, it's impossible. You end up destroying it. So the method that has been done up to this point, in a lot of the ADA grants that have been applied for and received, we have accesses where we have accessibility to a point of view, but not to the beach. You have ramps that you travel up to get to a point where you can see the stairs going down on the other side. And I'm wondering if in a lot of the town, height isn't an obstacle. In some of the town, it is an obstacle. So to use a ski slope approach, that accesses a green, that accesses a double black diamond. You know, maybe there's not a whole lot that can be done to improve those. And on a long term, whether if the town had guidelines for, we're going to try to keep this more toward accessible, maybe even ADA is something we can approach here, but on these other ones, let's try to make it so that people who are capable, handy capable, can use whatever devices they have to get there. Is that in the realm of possibility for applying for grants, et cetera?
Yes, and you know, you bring up a lot of good points. I think generally the point that, you know, people think ADA, you think wheelchair, and there's a lot of people on a spectrum of ADA people who are blind or have neurological disorders or any sort of realm of disability. For this CAMA Access grant program, the highest prioritized projects, the most well-funded, are those that exceed the ADA requirement, and then those that meet are ones that are also wanted to be funded. As you also mentioned, there's a lot of conflict in providing accessibility to these natural spaces, but you know, you can't have an elevator up the Appalachian Trail or you know, pave over the Grand Canyon to make it meet. So part of what you're mentioning, I think encompassing in your comment, is site selection is important. So the dune profile, hopefully we're picking accesses where they're naturally not so steep in slope to where it does require sort of stairs down. You know, I think you've probably seen those mats that come down, but then you're sort of balancing the natural sort of look of the beach. But, you know, personally, I like the design that we've done at a couple, and we're proposing here with the stairs through, with like the switchbacks that kind of go around it. That way it's not really an impediment to someone who's more able to go straight up, but then, you know, you have the ramps, and then hopefully the slope coming down to the ocean is within the ADA requirements as far as cross slope and slope. There's also, you know, carve outs in the ADA in the guidance that basically says, you know, if you have like a steeper slope, this is how steep it can be, but you have to provide basically an area where it's flat. There's like a resting area after that, and you know, we have David Ryan, who's well versed in the requirements and designing our ramps and slopes to make sure they're compliant with the slopes for these grants. But I guess, you know, I think we do have a plan to site select those that are evenly spaced, but also hopefully have dune profiles and slopes that would enable them to be more accessible, the ones we're choosing for ADA, and the ones with a really high dune profile. You know, let's not try to necessarily do that. But also, as you said, maybe there are things that we can do, whether it's truncated domes, if people are walking off the sidewalk, to know when they're leaving the sidewalk, or to make it sort of more accessible, if not quite ADA, and potentially that's an effort we can look to do in the future.
Because you know, and this kind of gets down to it. I can't talk to the percentages of the disability community, but every one of us has a bad day, you know, I've got a bum knee, my ankle's hurt, this or that. That's the spectrum of people that are getting to the beach. I right now have a voicemail waiting on my phone, someone who just had surgery that wants to go see the water. And, trying to help this out. One of the issues with this as well is how well does the town work? There is a really good website available, obxbeachaccess.com. They do a pretty good job at this. It's hard to keep up with it because of something that you mentioned, sand transport.
Half the year,
Yeah.
there's sand on the ramp, you can't get down.
But at the same
A
time,
lot of them.
because
A lot of them.
at the same time, because of the way we construct these accesses, it makes it more difficult to
that's
to
the
get equipment in
ramps.
there to move the sand that accumulates. And if we get to the point where my hope is, and the point of this conversation, I think, is to design things that are more easily maintainable, and that way, whatever improvements we're spending money to get are scalable through what is perceivable as the big wind that's coming. One of the other things in this is sand removal, and that's with the renourishment activities we've had in the past. Sand removal has been a big deal, so it drifts in like crazy. So I'm just kind of hoping that is something that we're building into that future.
I think so, and I think, like you said, you mentioned that website, and they have that nice sort of like subway looking map with all the accesses and which ones are ADA, and we also have mention on our website of which ones are, and we provide a service that I mentioned in the grant application of having beach wheel chairs available 365 days a year with our fire department if they're reserved. I think that's.
Can I suggest that possibly the town does a program in-house where, using that subway bit, very often when people see what the accesses look like, they say, yeah, I can do that. So even a picture would be very valuable to evaluate it, even more so than a bunch of symbols saying, this is not a handicapped accessible access, where if people look at the picture, they understand why it isn't a handicapped access and start to see what the possibilities are.
I like that. That's a good idea, because I've tried to get handicapped people to the beach, and it's like, well, let me go scope it out before we go over there. It's like, yeah.
Absolutely.
Because
I mean,
half the time it's covered.
And there are accesses that are non-ADA applicable, where there's a beach path. And if they don't have to worry about sinking into the sand, that's not really a barrier. In fact, that might be something they like.
I like that.
Yeah, I mean, I don't see any reason why we couldn't look into developing something like that.
Is Joe breaking things like this often?
This is the first time.
Didn't see it there. But yeah, I think that's a good idea. Obviously my mind goes to sort of GIS and the potential to do web maps where you can click on it and it can have like a photo of it.
Kind of exactly, and that's,
Yeah.
Thank you.
There's other ways to.
If there's anything I can do, any opinions you want, please refer to only me.
But yeah, I think it's a good point. Like you said, everyone's sort of disabled at some point or another. I think, also you mentioned, that conflict between providing access to the natural space they're trying to get to that's a balance, as well as sort of our CRS and floodplain management and not having a ton of it. So it's, it's funny how these all
And even to get into the next bit is, sign pollution. One of the things, there's a tendency to, once we develop one of these accesses, to put a whole bunch of signage up there. And one of the things that I'd be super interested in is a bunch of really cool stencils that we can paint in the ground where it's painted at their feet and doesn't pollute the view shed in front of them. That'd be cool.
Yeah. I think that's a good idea as well.
I've got a lot, sorry.
Are you
It's covered up by the sand.
tactical urbanism? Potentially?
Right, until the sand covers it up.
Really?
Thank
Thanks,
you,
Joe.
Joe.
That's all I have. Thanks.
Appreciate it. planning board members' agenda?
I'm sorry?
Planning board
I have a-
members'
I have a question
agenda.
for
Do we have
Kelly.
anything?
I have a question for Kelly.
Yes.
People are interested in what's happening with the hotel on Lakeside, or at the corner of Lakeside.
Yes, so,
Can you repeat the question?
Oh, what's happening with the hotel
Oh.
on the corner of Lakeside Street and the bypass?
Oh, yeah.
so, I guess it was about a couple weeks back. They, the developers have contacted McConnell and Associates out of Raleigh to help them with the condition that the Board of Commissioners placed on the approval, which was to make Lakeside a 3-lane roadway from the westernmost entrance up to 158, if you recall that. But it's a big ask. The right-of-way there is only 40 feet. So once you expand the road into 3 lanes, it leaves very little to no room for any type of drainage improvement before you hit private property, for any type of utilities, anything like that. So McConnell and Associates has done a rendering. They've shown if we were to do this, the impacts that it would have on the drainage infrastructure, on the driveways, etc. And they have reached out to see next steps, like how do they go about requesting that the Board of Commissioners amend that condition or remove that condition. And the way they do that is the exact same path that it took to get there. So that's submitting their site plan amendment, submitting all their information and their reasoning as to why they would like to have that condition amended or removed. And it goes back through the planning board and back through the Board of Commissioners. And each board gets an opportunity to say whether they think the hardship is such that we should amend it, whether we should keep it the same, or whether the entire condition should be eliminated. In the process, they provided a new site plan, which is different from the one that House Engineering prepared. There's no major deviations, but there's just enough that I'm not comfortable approving it as an administrative minor deviation. So I've told them, it's interesting, the building has grown in area, but their lot coverage has decreased. They've gone from 90 units to 87 units, which has given them a slight parking reduction. So I'm assuming that's where the lot coverage reduction has come into play. But it also requires them to redo their stormwater management, which David Ryan has not had an opportunity to look at. So, in looking at it very briefly, determined that the changes were major. I was not going to be able to handle it administratively. So both the site plan changes, as well as the request for reconsideration of the 3-lane Lakeside. That's all going to be coming back to the planning board probably in May, maybe June.
Okay, thanks.
Okay.
Thanks for the heads up.
Thank you. Dave? Nope. Yeah. Okay. Christie? Anybody?
I am really interested in the plan, the emergency plan. And I'd love to chat with you after we get out of here.
All right, so I'll entertain a motion to
Adjourn, make a motion?
We are
Second.
adjourned. Thank you.
Thank you.